Let's talk about the latest in the lockdown files. There's WhatsApp messages from Matt Hancock to Matt Hancock during the pandemic, which were revealed in the Daily Telegraph by, of course, talkTV's Isabel Oakeshott. Let's talk to Silkie Carlo, who's director of Big Brother Watch. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of what's been revealed today, just your general reaction to the actual files themselves, what we have learned about what was going on. Well, OK, even if it's partial, even if it's only one-sided, but what we've learned, even that one side of what was going on behind the scenes during the lockdown years.
It's incredibly important, clearly in the public interest and revelatory. I think what we found is that we had essentially government by WhatsApp, not just ministers and advisors, but scientific advisors dispensing advice over WhatsApp. Some of the decision-making was unprofessional, unscientific, self-serving for political careers, in cases callous. And now we are seeing why some of the decisions were made in the way that they were. We can see that, for example, when the public was being told that yet again, you've lost your freedom of movement, you have to be locked inside your home, the NHS is at breaking point, Hancock was thinking about importing COVID cases from across Europe. You know, it's revelations like this and insights like this that give us a look into not only the personalities, the lack of professionalism and the chaotic way in which this was managed, but the dual narratives. Yeah. The fact that people were deliberately being made to have an incorrect perception of the risk that they faced. Yeah.
There was no attempt to actually explain, look, this is a disease that largely affects the elderly. So if you're going to be coming in contact with the elderly need to take a lot of care. And if you're going to have contact with the elderly, you need to take a lot of care. But frankly, for everyone else, including our children and, you know, people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, frankly, unless you're really unwell or you're very obese, you're going to be probably fine. I mean, certainly we've never had warnings about flu for those age groups in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to elderly people, of course, the first revelation was incredibly important. The decision that Matt Hancock made there to deprioritise testing. And again, this is self-serving. It was around his own targets. Yeah. And yet, I mean, this is incredibly important stuff. And I have to say, I really don't think that unless we have it all out now, I don't think that the inquiry was going to be able to deal with this, or at least not in a timely way. No. And in terms of the risk, Julia, you know, another thing that's come out is the way that Kate Bingham was spoken about for suggesting that vaccines are given to people only at risk. They said that that was wacky, and suggesting that she needed to be suppressed in some way. I mean,
but it was always only the plan. The original plan was always that only the elderly should be 70 plus should be vaccinated. Again, it should have been choice. Again, I was really happy when my relatives in their late 70s and early 80s got their jabs. I was really happy, but there just simply was. I mean, certainly for children, I can't wait to see the WhatsApps about the JCVI and their decisions on children getting vaccinated, when their original decision was that there was no real reason for it to be done, because there wasn't, and then suddenly changing their mind. But let's talk about what's on the front page of the papers today, because this is, I mean, again, this just... It's something that just exposes the callousness and the willingness to do anything they wanted to do in order to keep control and have power. This is Matt Hancock in exchanges with his advisors about how to persuade rebel Tory MPs, particularly the 2019 Red Wall intake of MPs, to vote with them to impose more stricter measures this is December 2020. They wanted to have new, stricter tiers rules for tiers in England. And basically, Matt Hancock and his aides plotted to block funding for a new disabled children's centre in Bury to force the rebel Tory MP James Daly to vote with the government on this issue. As it was, Daly says he wasn't aware of this, there was no threat made, but he did actually vote against the government. But interestingly, the funding was never given for this centre. I mean, now we know that whips have, forever. They twist MPs' arms with, oh, look, you want that new hospital, or you want this and that. We know this happens, but this is played out so openly and callously. It is still shocking.
It's incredibly shocking. It's incredibly serious. It should invite disciplinary action of some kind. It looks very much like a breach of the ministerial code. It looks like you've got a minister and an advisor consulting each other about a plan for bribery. Matt Hancock using our money, public money, like it's his own, in order to attempt to basically blackmail an MP into doing what he wants them to do. And if you look through that list of MPs and the notes that have been kept about them, which I have to say I think is less remarkable than the plan to use public money to tell them what to do, you can see essentially who was doing their job. I mean, the things that MPs are asking for are cost-benefit analysis, a bit more evidence. You know, this is what they should have had. Yeah. And the fact that they're asking for the information that's required for them to do their job in order to make sound decisions goes to show that they were being systematically deprived of that information. And we can also see that in the revelations around quarantine period as well, that was against the scientific advice, that it was so extreme.
Yes, it was, instead of being taken down to 5 days, well, we'll keep it at least at 7 because it will look like we got things wrong. I mean, it was all about appearances, wasn't it? And it was a very important point. There may have been criminal action in this. We just accept, well, this is the norm. Well, just because it's the norm doesn't mean it ain't criminal. I mean, we don't normally have the evidence of these things. I mean, this is what's being played out. There's also big question marks about Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary. We've got big questions mark about him during, Partygate. The reason why Sue Gray had to lead that Partygate inquisition was because he was implicated in one of the parties. He'd walked into it, he knew it was happening. He was in charge of the bill. I mean, he was in charge of all the civil servants in the building. Junior civil servants are at these parties day in, day out. They get fined. He's completely, exonerated, it would appear. How convenient. But he was the person in charge. In any other business, he would have been out on his ear. And now all these revelations of these foul, callous, outrageous in some case, politically motivated messages that he's been sending. It's really quite shocking. Do you think he can survive in his job?
Absolutely no way should anybody involved in this be keeping their jobs, frankly, after what we've seen. And justice is needed much, much, much more quickly, which is why I think that this the publication of these messages is so important. Let me tell you, during in terms of the quarantine and ministers and advisors celebrating the fact that people are going to be locked in shoeboxes in Premier Inns. At Big Brother Watch, we had a young family get in touch with us who had a newborn baby, and they were wrongly, as it turns out, put into hotel quarantine. The father suffered extreme mental health crisis as a result. They weren't given supplies to feed their newborn baby. Yeah. He couldn't deal with how disempowered he felt, that he couldn't even look after his child. I mean, the real impact that all of these extraordinary decisions had, not just on individuals, but actually the state of the country, our freedoms, our democracy.
I think it's damaged us forever. Are you horrified not just by the messages, but also the reaction, I think certainly of a lot of the mainstream media to these messages, just attacking Isabel Oakeshott, some frankly foul attacks on her. One foul attack from the BBC's Richard Bacon, who was saying, telling her she was a horrible person simply because she tweeted out a link to her article she wrote on front of the Sunday Telegraph on Sunday morning, having spoken to her. And I spoke to her just after she'd spoken to this woman. I know how genuine this was. She was incredibly upset by this call. A mum whose son had committed suicide because his mental anguish over lockdowns and how it exacerbated his mental health problems. The attacks on the messenger are quite shocking, but also the number of people who are absolutely insistent, no, you're just lockdown deniers. I don't even know what that means. I don't deny we were locked down. But the refusal to accept that policy was made on the hoof. It was largely not scientific. It wasn't necessary. It was about power-hungry, egomaniacal, career-driven politicians and supine civil servants. And it wasn't about following science, and it wasn't about saving lives.
I think if people haven't got that by now, they never will. And the reason that Isabel is getting so much backlash, I'm sure she can sleep well at night given what she's done. It's an important public service. But the reason that she's getting the backlash is because basically everyone was turned into an enforcer, especially people at the BBC. They're responsible. They're responsible for the abdication of their duty to be scrutinising this. And yes, this is incredibly disappointing. When I think of former instances where whips have been caught out trying to use public money to basically bribe MPs to vote in the way that they want them to, it has caused uproar and it has created headlines. And in this case, it just seems that outside of the Telegraph and talkTV and, you know, very select few publications and platforms, this is just not creating the storm that it so clearly is. And I think that the upshot of that is now that for a lot of us, trust is gone.
Yeah.
Because we can see that in the establishment that we should be trusting to dissect this information and really be sort of pillars of democracy and tell us what's going on, they're just not doing it. They've actually become so close to government, and especially with the enforcement of lockdown and all of the rules that went with it, they became so close to government that it was actually imperceptible. They were doing service journalism. They weren't always doing scrutiny.
And the difficulty now in questioning what you did and thinking, hold on, maybe I was duped, maybe I didn't do my job. Lots of people would prefer to just kill the messenger rather than face up to their own failures. Hey, I didn't get everything right during this period fighting against things. I'm sure you didn't. I'm sure many of those who campaigned against lockdowns didn't. And we not got every figure right, not got every call right. But by God, at least we were trying to do it, for the right reasons.